All right, we're starting Unit 44 of the Morin units for the Menucha of Shneim Dangler and Sirmos Montefiore. We learned thus far, we focused on two kinds of things that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbat. There's a thing called Muktze. What is the definition of Muktze, Rafi? Something that's not in your world, being not in the world of useful for people, right? Not food and not a kli, and the definition of kli in this context is what Rafi very eloquently said. Not part of our world, right? Not useful for, not prepared for human use. That's one kind of muktzah, and the other is kli shel isul, which is not muktzah. We said that basically, broadly speaking, Rabbi Shimon holds only these two kinds of muktzah, meaning kli shel isur and muktzah. Those are the two, and the Muktze mechamat gufo. And when we say muktzah, what we mean is Muktze mechamat gufo. Broadly speaking, specifically, there are a few other things that are muktzah. There is Muktze mechamat isul. I'm not going to go into that right now. Basically, something that if I were to carry it on Knisat as Shabbos begins, that would be an isur, another isur, not the Muktze, right? The whole discussions about that one. For example, a candle. A lit candle are you allowed to carry after it expires, because when it's on, you can't really carry it without making the oil move, therefore creating havara, kibui, etc. Muktze mechamat mitzvah is another one. If you have something that you set aside for a mitzvah, say it's only for the mitzvah, we'll leave it aside, we're not going to touch it. Discussions about does Reb Shimon accept that, but apart from those which are, and Muktze mechamat mius, we mentioned, right? Muktze mechamat mius, that might be that in extreme situations, Rabbi Shimon agrees that you're not allowed to carry gross things on Shabbat either. It's just not Shabbos-dik. So we'll be discussing this in the context of the chamber pot, but we're going to move on to, there's one more muktzah Rabbi Shimon accepts, and the question is why. Let's briefly see that. You see on page 1 over here. Muktze mechamat Chesron Kis, אפילו רבי שמעון מודה, דתנן כל הכלים ניתנים בשבת, חוץ ממסע גדול והיטל של מחרשה. So even after, also Rabbi Shimon agrees that you're allowed to carry all kelim. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with this and says most kelim, many kelim, you can't carry because they're muktzah anyway. If they're not useful for Shabbat, Rabbi Yehuda says you're not to carry them. But Rabbi Shimon says no, if they're not useful for Shabbat, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily muktzah. So Masar Gadol Yitel Shel Machrasha, those stand out. Those are Muktze mechamat Chesron Kis. Now, one of the interesting things here is that there seems to be, I wouldn't say quite a discrepancy, but the Gemara doesn't seem terribly aware of this Muktze. It's a bit of a strange thing where the Gemara, where this, in the places in which the Gemara, this should come up in the Gemara, it's brought up, you'll see now, it's brought up in a slightly odd way. But let's see that. Like this. Says the Mishnah in Perek Yud Zayin Mishnah, Bet notel adam kurnas. Right, that's a hammer. Lefatzeh bo et ha'egozim, kordom, which is a saw. Lachtoch da dvila. Megillah is a saw. What's a kordom? Kordom is something more like a small axe kind of thing, right? What? Like a small axe.
An axe.
Right?
An axe.
A cleaver, an axe. Whatever. All right, close enough. Megirah legor bot הגרדה, that's a saw. Megirah is a saw. מגרפה לגרוף בה את הגורגרות ואת הרחת, ואת הגורגרות. את הרחת ואת המזלג לתת עליו לקטן. It's a pitchfork, as Rashi says over here, folka. So, דלב הקטן, את הכוש ואת הקרקר, לדחוב בו מחט של יד, לדחוב בו, מחט של יד, ליטול בו את הקוץ, של סכין, לפתוח בו את הדלת. So basically, we have all kinds of things here. There seem to be a mishmash of things that are kli shel isur and kli. It's not necessarily kli shel isur. And you say, well, as long as you have use, as long as they're useful, you're allowed to carry them on Shabbat. So useful for Shabbos uses. So you have a small fork that's usually used for hipuch kash bagoren, so you have to use a pitchfork to feed your children on Shabbat. Don't try it at home, kids. Right? How else would you feed your kid? What do you feed your children? Anyway. So the Gemara says, Natadam kurnas, Amar V'Yuda, kurnas shel eguzin, lefatza bo et eguzin. What kind of hammer are we talking about here? The nut hammer, the nutcracker. We're talking about the nut hammer. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Kurnas shel eguzin, lefatza bo eguzin. Aval shel napachim lo. Not a smith's hammer, but a nut hammer. So a nutcracker in essence. You might say, so what's the chidush, right? Okay. Kasavar davar shemachto leisur. What?
It's a key.
It's a kli, so it's not muktze, and it's a kli that's specifically kept in the kitchen. As opposed to you're talking about which one? The kunas shel gazim or kunas shel pachim? These are all kilim, correct. What the Gemara is trying to work out now. Wait, what are we talking? What's the issue in the Mishnah? So Rav Yehuda wants to propose that all the kilim in the Mishnah are all kilim shenachtam leheter. And Rabbi Nechemia says you shouldn't. Rabbi Nechemia says use only your fork and not the pitchfork, the fork, the regular fork. You can take your fork and you can take a plate, and that's it. Otherwise, cope without. What?
Keep it simple.
Yeah, that's Rabbi Nechemia. But you don't like Rabbi Nechemia, you like Rabbi Shimon, who says, no, you can carry anything you want, but again, all useful tools. Rav Yehuda wants to propose, also Rabbi Shimon says you have to carry all the useful tools, he means every useful tool in the kitchen, not from your shed, not from the smithy. So he says,
In your house.
whatever you use in the kitchen, you're allowed to use, as opposed to Rabbi Nechemia. That doesn't mean that you ought to take something that melachto leisur. That's what he's saying here. Amar V'Yuda kol nas shel eguzin lefatza bo eguzin v'al shel pachim lo. Kasavar davar shel melachto leisur afilu tzorech gufo asur. So אמר לי רבא, אלא מעתה, סייפא דקטן וטרחת ומלגז לתת עליו לקטן, רחת ומלגז מיחד לקטן. What are we talking about? We're talking about a fork that children use. It's insane. Who has a fork that children use? Children use forks? What's wrong with you? In their days, forks were used for work. They weren't used in the kitchen. It's ridiculous. No one would go to such trouble to have such complex metal work in the kitchen just to eat. You want to eat steak? Use your hand. You use your hands like Hakadosh Baruch Hu intended. Yeah. Anyway, Ela Rabba. So Rabba says, no, we're talking about the smith's hammer. So, with the smith's hammer, you're allowed to carry the smith's hammer as long as you're using it. So this, we've already discussed this. Right? For use that is mutar. בית שמאי אומרים נותנים לי לקצב עליו בשר בית הלל מתירים ושווים שאם קצב עליו בשר שהוא אסור לטלטלו. So we see that here so here the assumption, I'm not going to go into the whole set. The assumption here is that Beit Hillel are more lenient on Yantiv, and that's why they allow the Eli, even though the Eli is usually used in the it's usually where it's a profession. It's used in something professional to what's the word, to grind. It's used to grind professionally and not part of the kitchen. They allow here only for Yantiv, but only specifically they allow it for Yantiv, but otherwise it wouldn't be allowed, which would imply that because the Chesron Kis you're not allowed to use it. So That's not the discussion. They want to say maybe you're not allowed to use on Shabbos and Yantiv. Yantiv, we have more leniency because Simchas Yantiv, but it would be K'nei Shalach L'Yisrael and you wouldn't be allowed to carry it. They proposed maybe really this Mishnah would be Rabbi Nechemiah's opinion, in which case that wouldn't prove anything because Rabbi Nechemiah holds you can't carry basically anything on Shabbos. So the Gemara ends up saying, no, you can't prove anything from the Eli, because the case of the Eli is so really like this, just in terms of the structure. The Gemara starts off with a discussion about, are you allowed to carry a smithy's, right, the smith's hammer to crack nuts on Shabbat? Because of the question, are you allowed to carry on Shabbat? They want to bring proof from this Mishnah from Beitza to say that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbat, and then they say, no, you're not allowed to carry that on Shabbat because of a different reason. Which are all professional tools, happen to be painters, professional tools. The question is, what in the world does that last sentence say? Since you're makpid on them, they have a designated specific place that you set aside them for them. Say what now? Right. In other words, what I mean to say is, there are two ways of reading this last line in the Gemara. One way is to say that the criteria, why can't you use the Sikh Zarim Zoreh? Because you're makpid. So what? Your kpeda turns it into Muktze Chesron Kis. It's a question. Define makpid. In other words, how makpid do you need to be in order to justify calling it Muktze Chesron Kis? Sorry. The answer is Me'achadu Makom. Now, or that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, once you're Me'achad Makom, what that means is, what does Me'achad Makom mean? It means this stays here. There's a tool that stays here. I take it out, use it, put it right back. Comes Shabbos, they say, this is not moving from here. Next morning I say, oh, you know what, I could use this to crack my nuts. I say, no. The fact that when Shabbos began, you knew this is something that's not supposed to move, you've set it aside, and now it's become Muktze. You can't carry it even for things that you'd be allowed to use it for. Now, an interesting thing that happened here is that the Gemara already in Daf Kuf Nun Zayin on the first page they brought, the Gemara there mentions Muktze Chesron Kis. Here the Gemara doesn't mention it. The Gemara doesn't say. The Gemara could have very easily said, oh, no, this is something in Muktze Chesron Kis. Right? It doesn't come up here, which is a bit strange. See what I'm saying? Why? Right. We should have mentioned Muktze Chesron Kis. They should have said, no, that this Muktze Chesron Kis has nothing to do with Krishna Torah Yisur. That's what the Gemara should have said. The Gemara doesn't say that. Instead it brings Sikh Zarim Zoreh, which is something that comes up later than Masala Gadol, right? Masala Gadol is Tanaim. Sikh Zarim Zoreh is clearly Aramaic, which is later. Now, what might be is, so Bichlal, there's a bit of a strange thing, like why is the Gemara here not mention the elephant in the room? We're talking about Muktze Chesron Kis. Why is the Gemara bother saying this? It's a bit weird, right? That's what I was saying before, that the Gemara, the discrepancies are a bit strange. In other words, the Gemara should be saying, oh, no, we're talking about Muktze Chesron Kis. Look up Daf Kuf Nun Zayin. Right? The Gemara should have created that connection. It doesn't. That's a bit odd. Right? That's one point. Now, more importantly, Kivan de kapi delayu me'achadu makom is a very weird sentence, which we're going to have to figure out. Does this mean that something that does not have I can, if I say, why is this important? I can say that the yichud makom is what turns it into Muktze. When I set a place for something and I put it over there, and also look at the reasoning the Gemara gives. The Gemara says, Kivan de kapi dalayu miyachad makom. So what? It should be Kivan de kapi dalayu miyachad makom have Chesron Kis. Right? Miyachad makom looks like that's our goal. It sounds like I'm trying to prove that this is something that has a designated spot. Why are you doing that? Who cares about a designated spot? I care about whether there's Muktze or not. I don't care about the designation of the spot. So you can say no. If there isn't, if it doesn't have a designated spot, it's not Muktze mechamat Chesron Kis. So right, but then you should have said that. You should say but it sounds here like meyachad makom is the end goal. What I need to prove is that it's meyachad makom. It's meyachad makom. Okay, fine. Right?
That's the defining.
So you can say that's the defining factor, and then that would mean that what makes the Muktze mechamat Chesron Kis, what makes it Muktze, why is it Muktze? Because you're meyachad makom. Or you can say kapi dalayu means it's Muktze Chesron Kis. Okay, how makpid do you need to be? The answer is something that you designated a spot for. Question: could there be something that you're more makpid on without designating a spot for it? That something that you don't have a designated spot for, but you're very makpid on. Physically, that's possible, right? Like I'm thinking, what am I most makpid on, really? At least I should be. I guess this, right? My computer. I have nothing on meyachad makom. This computer's seen, this computer has been around, Would the computer be, would a laptop be mechamat Chesron Kis? It's probably the most important thing I have.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. If something would happen to it suddenly now, I'd recovering file, recovering work. It's a lot of work. The laptop isn't the money of the laptop. The laptop is all the work that I put into it. That then it's the months of work that I'd have to figure out how to retrieve my work, not the laptop, right? So I think it is probably the most important thing. The other thing is our phones. Our phones, no one's meyachad makom for their phones. It's actually they're very makpid on them. I think maybe people aren't so makpid anymore. I don't know. We're thinking about.
I guess it's like something much more different to you.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Like a phone, a laptop, it's like common. People aren't very careful with it.
People aren't.
I'm not particularly careful. So it depends. You have a lot of valuable work on it, so maybe it is.
Okay.
I don't.
So there's another question that's going to come up, which is this an individual thing or not? Right? If someone really isn't makpid, right? Let's say you have your shechting knife, right? L'chora, if I have a shechting knife, I should be makpid that it will not be used to chop salad. Why not? Are the cucumbers coarser than my more rough than the cow? There's no, but you just don't do that, right? Now let's say I'm not makpid. I say, sure, you want to chop salad? Sheila, right? But I do that. I didn't go so far as to say a bris knife, right? If you want to use your bris knife to cut brisket, would that be now? So the question is, so first of all, there's a subjective question here, but I'm putting that aside for a moment. I want to focus on the Pshat and the Gemara. I just want to point out that the Pshat and the Gemara is strange. First of all, in the sense of the relationship between Chesron Kis and the Gemara, but also when the Gemara says, the end goal is to show meyachad makom. So I can say, basically, I think there are one of two ways that would be reasonable to read this Gemara. One way would be to say, Kivan de kapi delayu meyachad makom. The Gemara could have said Chesron Kis, but had the Gemara said that, you'd say, prove it. Prove it. Why? Who said it's Chesron Kis? But I say here, I've already put the proof in. I said, all right, you see mechad makom, so you know it's Chesron Kis. Here too, mechad makom. And therefore, so the Gemara just didn't bother saying the next step because it's obvious. So now, is yichud makom in that case? Is yichud makom a necessary step? Not necessarily, right? It could be that just one very good example of Muktze Chesron Kis is things that you're mechad makom. If it's Muktze Chesron Kis for which you're not mechad makom, it's a different story. So in a chinami, it could be. It's just that here it was easy to prove it. Say, oh, Silzar Mzore, mechad makom. Here too, mechad makom. So of course they're all Muktze Chesron Kis. What about other things that are mechad makom? Also good. And then the criteria of yichud makom would not be critical. That's why it is important. Or I say, no. Yichud makom that turns into Muktze. Why is it Muktze? Why is Rabbi Shimon accept this Muktze and not the others? Manishtana, or already Chosh Shadar, if you think about Pesach, right? It's Manishtana, Muktze Chesron Kis from all the other Muktzas, that Rabbi Shimon accepts it. So one option is to say that the Yichud makom means that I've really set it aside from use. The fact that a makbid is not used for other things and I designate a certain place means I'm designating this to not be moved on Shabbat, and that's what turns it into Muktze. So these are two ways of reading the Gemara. We have a couple of minutes left, but I want to quickly see.
Yeah, we call it a siman or siba. Kind of.
Yes, the siman or siba, correct, is the yichud makom, I guess, but again, that itself has to be broken up into three options. There's the siba. What makes it Muktze is the yichud makom. The fact that I have a designated place and I don't want to move it from there, that's why it's Muktze. That'd be on the siba end. The siman end would break into two options. Siman end would say, how makbid do you need to be? There has to be some kind of objective measurement, some kind of objective metric by which I could decide whether it's Muktze or not. What is that objective metric? So yichud makom, that's an objective metric. Can there be other metrics? Possibly. So here, that's the two options. You can say, no. The definition is something that you're makbid so much and you're chad makom. What happens if it's something I'm not mechad makom, right? I don't designate a place for it, but I know I really am makbid, like Seder, but that's just not what Chazal talked about, because I have to have an objective metric. You can't say, well, this I'm makbid, this I'm makbid. Halacha can't work like that.
Is it necessary or sufficient?
Correct. Is it, or do I say it's good enough a criteria, but there can be other options, there can be other things that really are, that I can use other metrics as well. Not necessarily only that one. So let's see one more interesting Gemara, and what I'll do is just to play a game, to get the Zeh. We have to play a game? Of course, Shvada Shadar. So the Gemara says an interesting thing. Menorah, I want to read this in one of two ways. Right. The Gemara Daf Mem Hey, on the bottom page 3. Menorah. Bein itla beyado achat, bein itla b'shtei yadav, asur l'taltalam. Tama mai, Rabbi v'Rav Yosef da'amar et Ravayu, ho'il v'adam kovea lamakom. So there are two ways of reading this part of the Gemara. You can say that at this point, what's a menorah? I guess this is the first question you need to ask. Okay. Now, we're talking about a big one, right?
Big one or small?
Hands here. But right, if it's a two-hand menorah, it means it's it's a serious thing, right? Now, so one hand might imply a bigger one, right? It's not a ner, it's a menorah, right? All right, so we're talking about a bigger item. You're not allowed to carry. Why not? Rabbi Rav Yosef say because it has a designated place. Amar Abai Rav Yosef, kilat chatanim da'adam kovea lo makom ve'amar Shmuel mishum Rabbi Chia kilat chatanim mutarin tutar lefraka b'Shabbat. Ela amar Abai b'shel chuliot. So, what happens at the end of this Gemara to kviat makom? is that still a relevant criteria or not?
What's kilat chatanim? What's a kilat chatanim?
Kilat Chatanim is sorry. It's like is that a 4-poster bed? Is that what it's called? It's like a bed with a canopy, right? A double bed with a canopy. So it's like a whole gross zach that you put together, but you do move. So like this. So what's the Gemara's bottom line here? So there are 2 ways to understand what happens here in the Gemara. I'll just quickly present the 2 ways, and then we'll revisit this next week. One way is to say that the Gemara thought that menorah is enough of a kavua makom to justify being considered Muktze Chesron Kis. Abai says to Rav Yosef, but we have other things that are also pretty kavua, and they're not Muktze Chesron Kis. So what's the maskana? You need to have something that has a real kavua makom mamash, and that's why the Chesron. You're asking what's the relationship between the
case is what it's got value,
right?
Okay.
What is it?
Right. So here's a good the menorah and the kilat chatanim. This 4-poster bed and this menorah. You can say that, right? That's already an English word, right? Menorah. The Gemara seems to say if they have a specific spot, then maybe that proves kpeda. And then Tosfot will say it's not specific enough, because the Gemara ends up saying, you see, it's not true. You are allowed to move the kilat chatanim on Shabbos. But what does that prove? The kilat chatanim is something you move. So the 4-poster bed is something you move. Therefore, you can't say it's something you don't move. Now, I moved rarely. Doesn't matter. It's still not something that you're really makbid on its place all that much. And therefore, the criteria of what makom are you kovea, so the bottom line of the Gemara is the criteria for what is a kvut makom, the standard goes way high. It has to be something you really kovea makom. You take, use, put back right away. A very specific spot. And that would mean that what in our world would be Muktze Chesron Kis? Basically nothing. Because no one's really makbid on anything these days anymore, to be honest.
Yeah, if you had like an antique chair that you sit on.
Okay, no. You have some decorative things that you have in the house that you wouldn't. Right, possibly paintings on the wall if they really are Chesron Kis. I know some paintings that are Chesron Kis, right? Which really are pretty expensive. What? Beseder.
Wouldn't you say any painting would be there?
So that's a question. Because the question is,
If you never touch it,
if you really are makbid,
That is got a kavua spot. That is got a kavua spot. Is that got?
right? So exactly. So the sign over here, right? Would they say?
If you're painting a wall, you did it.
No, but
But if you had a
if you're gonna be cleaning with the menorah is not Shabbat, you also move it.
If it was truly a value menorah, you wouldn't just move it. You would have a team and you would do it gloves. And think of a painting.
No. Because it depends how big it is. You can with one hand. You don't need a team to do that. You just take it away, put it on the table, you clean it, and when you clean the shower, you put it back. But that's a kavua spot.
I think that would be reasonable. But if you have paintings that have a little sensor that tells you if it moved, I know people like that. So that's I think we'll all agree. But it's only that it would mean that only that would be Muktze Chesron Kis. All right. I'm going to tell you the Pnei Yeshua reading.
On the wall that have got a kavua spot.
Yeah,
The whole thing.
No.
Coming out still got a kavua spot.
That's what it sounds like. It sounds like, because here's the thing. When you talk about the menorah, and we talk about the kilat chatanim, are these really things that are super expensive and people are very makbid on? It doesn't sound like it. So it sounds like if only it was something that you were makbid on at the spot, you don't really care all that much what else you have to say about it. By the way, what's the difference between all the tools we had so far and the menorah and the kilat chatanim, or at least kilat chatanim?
These are used all the time.
Okay, say better. Shabbos wise, what's the difference in all the other tools and the Kilat Chatanim?
They're common things, they're not,
So you plan on using that Shabbat.
that's in anybody's house.
All of them are in everyone's house.
No,
Everyone
not
has.
necessarily.
A normal person would use.
So either they do or they don't. I don't think it was much more. It was, I
A
think.
normal person would be using Kilat Chatanim on Shabbat.
Why not?
Why not?
Would.
It's great. Oh, you
A
would.
normal person
Why?
would.
Why? What's the difference? New. The question is in
No,
the answer is in my question. What's the difference in all the tools we mentioned so far and the bed?
I mean, the same malachim, but you're gonna say it's not a tool.
It's not a tool. No, right? No malachim about it. It's not klishon tol isul.
Right, it's the same malachim.
It's not klishon tol isul.
Oh, it's.
Is that a criteria?
They didn't say so.
We never mentioned this until now, right? Just saying. We didn't mention until now that one of the criteria is it being klishon tol isul. Right. We'll have to revisit that next week. Shkoyach. It's getting late.
I think also, can I say